news cycle, whatever platform you use, be it CNN, Fox, whatever, the story is about Israel being at war. And in my mind, there are so many questions that have gone unanswered. I mean, in that just that line, the tagline, Israel at war. Israel at war with whom? You know, they say that it is Hamas that fired this initial volley of rockets into southern Israel, which precipitated this conflict. However, Hamas does not wear uniforms. So, how do we differentiate between who is Hamas and who is just a civilian in Gaza? And right now, the response from Israel has been indiscriminate. And the rockets that are being fired, or missiles that are being fired into Gaza, are hitting civilian sites, such as the hospital the other day. So, what's interesting about that, initially, Israel said that they had killed a Hamas fighter in a hospital. Well, when there was a public outcry and backlash, all of a sudden the story changed. And we're told now that it was an errant missile fired, I believe they said Islamic Jihad, who prior to, we hadn't heard them being involved in this conflict at all. We were told that Hamas had attacked, a coordinated attack against sites in Israel. I have, as I expressed last week, some reservations about that. Israel has the best, and I mean the best, security apparatus, or should I say, intelligence gathering apparatus in the world. I don't think America rivals Israel in their ability to gather intelligence. And, you know, American intelligence, well, we went to war, we invaded the country of Iraq, and then after bombing with these people, we were told, well, the intel may have been faulty. And our former president, Donald Trump, he was skeptical of the intelligence community. And in some ways, he may have been right. You know, how do you say that a man has a cache of offensive weapons and yet not find a single one? So something definitely is wrong. But, you know, but back to Israel, they have, without doubt, the best intelligence gathering apparatus out there on the planet. And they demonstrated that time and time again. And nothing happens in the Middle East that Israel is not aware of. So to say that Hamas, a small so-called terrorist organization, could carry out an attack of that size and scale all by themselves is difficult for me to accept and believe. I think right now what's happening is that Israel has said Iran is behind supplying Hamas with not just training, but equipment, missiles, rockets. And they have demonstrated, I guess to the satisfaction of the Israeli people, that there is a nexus between Iran, Hamas, and maybe Hezbollah in Lebanon. I'm not so sure. Despite the U.S. response, and the U.S. has said our intelligence, the faulty ones anyway, they said they have not been able to prove that there is currently a relationship between Hamas and Hezbollah, in as much that they are supplying weapons. So if that is the case, why have we dispatched 2 aircraft carrier groups to the Gulf region? If there is no definitive proof that Iran is supplying Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza with weapons, why are we moving warships into place? And not only have we dispatched 2, England has also dispatched an aircraft carrier into the group, into the area. So for Israel to be at war, first question I have is at war with whom? Again, how do you differentiate between who is a civilian in Gaza and who is a Hamas fighter? Is Hamas even in Palestine, in Gaza? You know, we in this country, and I guess around the world, to be fair, what happens is the world kind of works from cause to effect. What happens is the media shows us the effect and then wants to give their description of the cause. So we don't really know the actual truth. It is said that the first casualty in war is the truth. And, you know, that seems to be holding, I guess that can be said of what happened in our conflicts in this country and also possibly what's happening in Israel right now or in Gaza. I don't know if at this point, if this is Hamas, I don't know if they have the capability at this point to continue to fire rockets into Israel. And at this point, with Israel prepared to enter into Gaza and launch a ground attack, how would Hamas be able to stay there and continue to fight? It just does not seem feasible. At this point, from what the media is reporting and what Israel has said, some Israeli leadership, they have requested that 1 million Gazans leave. Let me say that again. Israel has requested that 1 million Gazans pick up the little bit of things that they have and leave the only home they've ever known and go from a known to an unknown. Many of them are trapped at the border with Egypt that has remained closed. So where are they supposed to go? And how do you expect to evacuate 1 million people in the span of 24 hours? It's an impossible undertaking. Even if you had an airlift, it's almost impossible to locate 1 million people, get them to a particular point where they can be taken out. It's just what's happening is chaos. It is a chaotic situation. And the continued bombing, many countries now are speaking out, realizing what is happening in Gaza is a humanitarian crisis. There's little to no food. The water supply has been shut off. There's no electricity. The hospital, which had just maybe hours left, a few remaining, well, that now has been struck by a missile. And they were saying, I think the media reported 500 people killed. So if we go with the initial story that Hamas fired rockets into Israel and that precipitated this conflict, well, now these missiles that they're firing, somehow now they're faulty and they're falling on civilian targets in Gaza. Does that make sense? If it does to you, well, okay, I understand. But to me, it does not. You know, people have said, to me anyway, that I am a conspiracy theorist. I like to say no, I just don't believe the government's official story. Because sometimes the story just does not make sense. So many events, world events, have simply not made sense. And it's only years later do we begin to understand the truth about what actually happened and why. For Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife and members of his caucus, the Likud party, as you know, well, maybe you don't know, Benjamin Netanyahu has been in control of Israeli politics now for nearly 2 decades. In and out of the position of prime minister. So in his case, a few years back, he was brought up on charges, bribery amongst others, both he and his wife. So there are some domestic problems with he and his wife. Also, his party is losing seats in the Knesset. Now, typically, when that happens, when a world leader is in trouble, even in this country, there's always an attempt to deflect away from their troubles. And sometimes that deflection leads to bombs being dropped. How many of you remember when Bill Clinton was embroiled in this situation with Monica Lewinsky and there was talk of impeachment? Well, as the impeachment process began to heat up, all of a sudden there was some intel again, there's that word again, intel, that there was a terrorist location that posed a threat to the United States. Well, I'm not sure if it was a missile strike. I believe it was a missile strike. But an aspirin factory was bombed in Africa. Afterwards, when people were allowed to go in and view the site, they found no indication that there was ever any terrorist activity going on. This was simply an aspirin factory. But again, when a world leader is in trouble, they look for a deflection, a way to point, I guess, the cameras and the world's attention away from them, a brief respite. Could that be what's happening in Israel with Netanyahu and Likud? And I think that most people would agree. And I'm talking about people in Israel and around the world. Benjamin Netanyahu is probably to the right of Donald Trump on many issues, particularly as it relates to Israel's protection. You know, he said some time ago that before he leaves office, he wants to bomb Iran. Well, I guess prior to this most recent outbreak of violence, there was really no justification for launching a preemptive strike. Well, now that we're told that Hamas has attacked along Israel's southern border, Israel is again retaliating, but also Israel has fired missiles to the north into Lebanon. Now, prior to, at the outset of this conflict, Lebanon or Hezbollah in the north was not involved. They were staying out of this particular conflict. Well, now it seems as if they're being dragged in. If Hezbollah retaliates against Israel and begins to fire its rockets, and folks, let me draw a distinction. Rockets are old, outdated armaments. Today, we fire missiles, precision guided missiles, where you can strike a target and typically within 10 meters. That's how close you can get. And I saw today, before coming on the air, that Boeing has now expedited a shipment of kits to Israel. And what these kits will do, they will take normal ordnance or missiles and make them precision guided. Now let's think. Gaza right now is a strip of land 25 miles long, 6 miles wide. They do not have a military. They don't have a navy, don't have an air force. What they have is outdated military technology. They have some, Russian AK-47s. They do have, I guess, maybe some rockets, but nothing that would allow them to compete with Israel's overwhelming power. Yet, despite that, two nuclear aircraft carriers from the United States are currently headed to the Gulf. Probably one, if not both, are there already. And as I said earlier, England has dispatched a carrier. Now, why do you need all that firepower if you're fighting a small group like Hamas? And as I said, Israel retaliated or preemptively struck in Lebanon. Now, what do Lebanon and Gaza have in common? Well, we're told that Hamas is in Palestine and that Hezbollah is in Lebanon. And we're also told that behind both of them is Iran. Is Iran the real target? Does Iran pose the greatest threat? And if so, who does Iran pose a threat to? Now let's talk a little bit about this conflict that we've had with Iran. This conflict goes back probably over 70 years now. About 1950, the president of Iran was a man by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh. During that time, Iran was, as it is today, a major oil producing nation. Well, most of the money from the proceeds of the sale of the oil went to a British company, British Petroleum. Mossadegh wanted to negotiate with the British a fair price, which only makes sense, right? If the oil is under your sands and your people are hungry, uneducated, inadequate healthcare facilities, roads, things of that nature, well, common sense, you want to negotiate a fair price that will provide, money for British Petroleum, but also will provide money for Iran and helping Iran to become recognized as a world power, at least economic power, not necessarily military, but economic. Well, of course, British Petroleum, did not agree with that. Simply told, it was like, no. And I guess it's the same mentality today. Look, it's our oil under your sands, and you will have very little say on how much you get for it. Well, after trying all legitimate means, going to the UN and trying to work out a coalition of other countries, President Mossadegh, nationalized the oil fields, which means he was essentially going around British Petroleum. Once that happened, well, the British decided Mossadegh has to go. Now, up to this point, this is a conflict between the Brits and Iran. Somehow, the US got involved. We sent over, I believe it was the grandson of former President Teddy Roosevelt, and he wrote the CIA book on how to engineer a coup and overthrow a government. It is a strategy that is employed to this day. So President Mossadegh was overthrown, and in his place, a little obscure fella by the name of Reza Pahlavi got into power. We knew him as the Shah of Iran, who ruled with an iron fist and allowed the British to extract as much oil as they wanted, as long as he got his share. Forget the people, the Pahlavis got their share, and it's all that mattered. Well, I guess some of us know the rest of the story. 1979, the Iranians said enough is enough. The Shah of Iran rose to power. I'm sorry, not the Shah. The Ayatollah rose to power, seized the U.S. embassy, and there was a revolution in Iran. A revolution that's kind of going on to this day. Iran has been relatively quiet since their wars with Iraq and other conflicts in the region. During that time, Iran has very quietly built its forces, so much so that the Israelis believe, if not now, in the very near future, the Iranians will have nuclear capability. That being the case, Israel simply will not allow a nuclear powered Muslim country in the region to have control of nukes that can capable of striking Israel. For Saddam Hussein, back in the late 70s, early 80s, he had built a gun that would fire a long range projectile into Israel. Well, of course, Israeli intelligence found out and they launched a preemptive strike and bombed the gun. Did the gun really pose a threat to Israel? Probably a minor threat. How many projectiles can you fire at one time from a gun? This was, I guess Saddam thought it was a great idea, but it's really outdated technology. It's like a battleship, a long gun that fires a projectile, 25, 30 miles or more. Well, this gun was designed to strike from Iraq to Israel. Would it have worked? We'll never know, because as I said, Israel destroyed it. Well, now we have this situation very similar in Iran. It is speculated that they have been working on nuclear technology for some time, and that they have been, I guess, in conversation with North Korea, with China, and with the former Soviet Union or Russia in regard to obtaining nuclear technology. Well, if that's the case, if Iran does have a nuke or nukes, it would seem as if now there is justification. Now, we have to think, right? If something works, you stick with it. So let's go back to the years after 9/11. 2001, after the towers were, I'll say, blown up. I don't want to say struck by planes. I want to say they were blown up. The president at the time, George W. Bush, was not very popular prior to 9/11. In fact, it took going to the Supreme Court to decide the presidency of the United States and stopping the vote count down in Florida to do such. Well, after this attack, suddenly George Bush was the leader of America, the leader of the free world. He said, we're going to retaliate against those who have attacked on American soil. He told us that it was Saddam Hussein that had launched this vicious attack against America and a symbol of American power. Well, what's interesting is George W. Bush, when he was young, he started his own oil company. It's a company called Arbusto Oil. And he needed financial backing in order to start the company. Well, if you do the research, you find one of the major backers of Arbusto Oil was the Bin Laden family. So to say that George W. Bush and his father before him, George H.W. Bush, did not know the Bin Laden family is ridiculous. Anyway, President Bush, told us that his former investor, the Bin Laden family, and possibly Saddam, was hiding in a cave in Afghanistan. Okay. So Americans were angered by what we saw on 9/11. So many young men and women went down to recruiting offices and joined up to seek vengeance for those who lost their lives. Now, having been a Port Authority police officer during that time, 37 members of my department died on that day. And there, I can't think of one that I did not know or have some sort of relationship with. In fact, I was the last name on the list. Somehow I got on there. But that's another story. Anyway, we had so many people signing up for the military that wanted to go and seek justice for what happened to America on that day. Well, as we're preparing for this full-scale invasion of Afghanistan, suddenly the president pivots and says that Saddam Hussein must disarm. But why? There was no intelligence showing that Saddam Hussein was in any way involved in the events of 9/11. In fact, what we're told is that most of these hijackers were Saudis. So how is it that 19 hijackers, most of them from Saudi Arabia, but now Saudi Arabia has most favored trading status and is a major economic power, and is even telling the president, the current president, Joe Biden, where to go when you come over and say you need to lower oil prices. This is the same President Biden that said, well, the Saudis killed Jamal Khashoggi, so we're going to take some action. Well, when he got elected, he didn't do anything about Jamal Khashoggi. He went to the Saudi family or Saud family, hat in hand, saying, can you please lower oil prices? It's going to affect my approval rating back home and possibly the election. Saddam Hussein, on the other hand, who no intelligence to suggest he was involved, all of a sudden he becomes a madman. Somebody that we have to hunt down and destroy. Now, I just wanted to draw that parallel, right? Afghanistan, now we move to Iraq. Iraq that had rivers of oil. Well, what happened to those rivers of oil? Why are our gas prices in this country so high after 20 years of armed conflict? One of the first things we did was secure the oil fields. What happened? Okay, bear that in mind. Now let's shift to Israel and Palestine. October 7th, according to Israel, a surprise rocket attack from Hamas. Now, if the rockets start firing on Saturday morning, who has time on Saturday afternoon to go into Gaza and find out who fired the rockets? Somehow they knew it was Hamas. Okay. Here we are, 2 weeks later. Israel has fired a preemptive strike against Lebanon. Okay. Now let's say Israel can justify their actions in the Gaza, which would be extremely hard when 3,500 Gazans have been killed. The numbers are continuing to rise, and 1 million people displaced. I'm not quite sure how you justify that if the person or persons who fired at you were from the group Hamas. Okay. Then there's Lebanon. How do you justify the actions in Lebanon? The Lebanese, or Hezbollah, who is in Lebanon, or so we're told, has not fired a single shot. How do we justify the actions against them? And I'm still not sure as to why we have this massive buildup of firepower in the Gulf if the only threat to Israel is Hamas that Israel has been dealing with for years, and Hezbollah that Israel has successfully dealt with for years. Why now do you need all of this potential firepower? And American troops are being put on full alert. So again, If what we're dealing with is a small situation that is contained to Israel and the Gaza or the Gaza Strip, well, why are we putting American troops on full alert? And why are we sending naval vessels into this region? The last time that we put an American naval vessel into a, I guess, hot zone, well, the result of that was the war in Vietnam that lasted 10 years, killed 4,000 Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians, and 58,000 Americans. Is that what we're trying to do now? You know, I mean, when you talk about, or when I spoke of Benjamin Netanyahu and his troubles at home, well, let's be realistic. For our current president, things are not looking so well here either. His approval rating is below 40%. Congress currently is at a state of civil war, so much so that they ousted the Speaker of the House and can't seem to elect a new speaker. So with all of this chaos, now we're bringing in or sending in the troops. You know, folks, sometimes you just have to stop and ask yourself, what the hell is really going on? What is the objective for Israel, for America, for England? What is the real plan? Yeah, I know it seems that, let me not say that. What's happening is a tragedy. Lives are being lost on both sides. But how do you bring peace by killing more people? Simply does not make sense. And there's an adage, for those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. So in 1914, the war to end all wars erupted in Europe. 4 years of bloody trench warfare. And after the end of that conflict, people said, never again. Not ever will we be involved in a conflict of that scale that took so many lives. Well, in less than 20 years, we were back at it again. More lives this time in World War II. Now, it appears as if we may be on the verge of a third world war. This situation in what's called the Middle East is a powder keg. And all we're doing is we're putting more firewood and fuel into the area. And for the other Muslim countries that have basically remained, I guess you'd have to say, neutral with regard to this conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Well, now that America and England are coming into the region, will they see that as provocation? Well, let's think. If you are sitting, nice warm day, you're sitting out on your, for those of you from New York, if you with the term stoop, you're sitting on your stoop and you see the neighborhood bully who's robbing and raping and, committing mayhem coming down the street. Well, do you sit there and wait for him to get to you? I mean, you can go in the house and lock the door, but you got to come out tomorrow and the day after. So for the Muslim countries in the area, in the region of Israel or the Middle East, or what's called the Middle East rather, they are going to see this as an act of war. Why would America that talks peace, that has been brokering a peace deal between warring sides since the 70s. Why not send in diplomats? Why not send in peacekeeping forces? No, America sent in two carrier groups. Does that sound like they're there for peace? England also sent in a carrier. Now, why would England get involved in this? What do they hope to accomplish? What is their objective? I think the objective of all three, America, Israel, and England, is to realign not just the Middle East, but realign the entire planet. For the former colonial powers, after the independence movement around the world that caused the breakup of the United Kingdom or the British Empire, I think the Brits are hanging on to the Falklands and a few other small places, but that empire does no longer exist. In America, the US dollar is virtually worthless. Around the world, years ago, everybody wanted the greenback. We don't even take it in America anymore. So many stores don't want your dollar. Instead, they want your debit card, they want your credit card, but they do not want the dollar. If it's worthless here, it's worthless abroad. And with so many foreign entities, and I mean governments by that, looking to convert away from the dollar as the world's reserve currency, and perhaps a gold-backed currency that would cause the complete collapse of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. economy. In order to keep it afloat, we've had to do a lot of fighting and killing. If you do some research into Saddam Hussein, you find that Saddam was interested in a gold-backed currency. You do a little research on Muammar Gaddafi, he also had allocated $70 billion for African nations to escape the plantation economics that is the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Well, he too ceased to exist. But now we have bigger players in the game. The BRIC is Brazil, Russia, India, Iran, and I believe China. Maybe the long-term goal is to pick them off one at a time. Start with Iran. Now that there is some level of justification, Israel can say, we believe that there is a real and credible threat from Iran, and we have to take action. If Israel decides to launch missiles or airstrikes against Iran, Iran will most certainly retaliate. If Iran retaliates, you better believe American warships will launch strikes against Tehran, guaranteed. These aircraft carriers are not there on a sightseeing mission. They're not there selling ice cream in the desert. They are there preparing for this strike that is coming. This whole conflict in the Gaza with Hamas is going to wind down. It has to. Palestinians are fleeing for their lives. There's nothing left behind for them to stay there. Hospital destroyed, no water, no light, no little to no food. They have no choice but to leave or die. So that conflict is going to wind down. The bigger conflict, well, that's the reason why we're there. Because again, the shooting is going to start. At least it appears that way. And my concern is for the people in this country, poor and working class people who are going to be told by the media and our government that you have to send your sons and daughters to protect democracy. Democracy, we barely have at home. And I say barely. You have to go off and protect democracy 7, 8, 9,000 miles away from home. But who's protecting it here? Who's protecting the American people? We talk about violence. And again, this is a tragedy, what is happening in, the Middle East between Israel and the Palestinians. However, we see the same level of violence right here in this country. What are we doing about it? Well, typically Congress says, well, our thoughts and prayers are with the family of those who were slaughtered. But because the gun makers are sending some very big campaign donations, there's really no action taken. So if we can go and defend the Middle East, why can't we defend Brooklyn or Philadelphia? How about South Central Los Angeles? What about those places? What about the taxpayers in this country who are being priced out, who can't maintain a roof over their head, food on the table, has to make a decision about put gas in the car, food on the table? What about those people? Those forgotten folks who can't afford to send their kids to college, who are working harder and getting less? What about them? The answer is, we hear your cries. However, we've got to send your money to Ukraine because we need to defend democracy. Really? Or now we need to send your money to the Middle East because we've got to defend democracy. Forget about the people at home who are struggling. And the pandemic clearly showed the face of struggle. If you looked at some of the media reports during that time, there were people giving out food. And some of the cars that showed up were high-end cars. So the struggle is real. It's not just the people in the so-called underserved neighborhoods that are struggling. It's all over America. It's in some of the affluent neighborhoods. Because all it takes is some bad investments, and you're one paycheck away from disaster like millions of others in this country. And then we have the situation at the southern border. We haven't figured that out. And we're not going to, because now our attention is clearly in the Middle East and the next war. And unfortunately, in this country, we have yet to find a war that we have not liked. War is big business. Yes, people die. A lot of people. Babies, women, all of them. And, our hearts go out to these people. But for corporations, they don't give a damn. It does not matter to them because no one they know is in Gaza. No one they know is in South Central or in South Philadelphia or in the west side of Chicago. So these are places that they really don't care about, but they do care about the money that war brings in. More arms to sell, more medical supplies to sell. And then the big prize is, once they bomb your country till it's flattened, then you have to take out loans to rebuild buildings, hospitals, schools, roadways, airports. Literally trillions of dollars that will flow into the hands of the same people that started the conflict in the first place. So as I said, things go from cause to effect, and we see the effect and try to figure out the cause. The cause is greed. That's what it amounts to. Greedy people that do not care what they have to do to get more money. Life and death mean nothing to them. It's all about the money, the power, and the accumulation of power and more wealth. So folks, I think you just need to be skeptical when you look at the medias. coverage for what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. Be very, very skeptical. Use your common sense. You don't need a PhD. Sometimes all you need is a degree in common sense, and it'll tell you something doesn't seem right. And if it doesn't seem right, it's not. And we in this country, we just came out of a 20-year long war, and I don't see where it benefited us in any way. Gas prices are still high. Soldiers have come home, can't find work. The VA hospitals dilapidated, and some of them wait weeks and months to see a doctor. Sometimes, in some cases, even longer than that. So they want you to fight, but when the war's over, you're forgotten. So, folks, I think you just need to be extremely skeptical, with regard to this coverage. Look beyond what the media is saying, and it's important to look at other sources because of all our media companies, most of them are owned, or all of them are owned by corporations. Corporations that have a vested interest in keeping you foolish and blindfolded so that they can keep extracting money from you one way or the other. So, folks, open your eyes, listen to alternative sources. Here on Gynesis Radio, there are a number of programs here that talk about these things you're not going to hear on CNN, not going to hear on Fox News, not going to hear on HLN, or any of the mainstream media. And let's be realistic. Donald Trump may have had a point about one thing. When he talked about fake news, yeah, a lot of it is fake. So do your research, folks. This stuff is not hard to find. The government really doesn't try too hard to hide it anymore because they know that most of us are so distracted, just struggling every day to figure out how we're going to feed our kids the next day, the next week. So we stay distracted. But folks, just understand that if this is another, you say 9/11 type event, well, I would call it a false flag operation. If that's what it is, understand it's not the rich corporations, it's not the CEOs that are going to be in the front line. It'll be you, your sons, your daughters, your mothers and fathers out there fighting in the desert again. And for what? Just think about that, folks. Just think about the last 20 years and how so many units, so many young men and women deployed 5, 6, 7 times, came home burnt out, stressed out, and who helps them? So I just want you to think about those things. When you look at this footage from what's going on, don't think about it emotionally. Think about it realistically and ask, what is the real objective? What are they really trying to do in this region? And why are we so heavily involved that we have 2 aircraft carriers there? Folks, there's something going on, and it's much deeper than a little skirmish between the Palestinians and Israel. Israel does not need our help in dealing with the Palestinians. So, folks, I just hope that something we said today has struck a chord with you and that you will want to do a little research into what's really going on in this world that we live in. I'm not someone that considers themselves a genius, but I do know that some of these things are easy to track down. This information isn't hidden. You can Google it and get a lot of this information on what's happening. So, folks, be aware. And again, when you look at this footage, try not to be too emotional, be rational, and understand that this conflict begins to escalate, it is us that will suffer here in America and in the Middle East. So with that, I'm going to step aside. We have another show coming on. I believe we have strategy coming in. There's going to be some good music. So folks, hang around. There'll be some good music, some talk, and some more food for thought. And I hope to see you again right here next Thursday with another Thoughtful Thursday. Y'all have a good night.